I found out recently that Jesse and Brandon's son, Aiden, really likes to light the chalice. So Brandon, would you come up and help us? Aiden, would you come up and help us with that this morning? And would the rest of you say the chalice lighting words as Aiden lights the chalice? With this. We gather this hour as people of faith, with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share today.
I've been invited to speak on the seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And I'd like to begin with this statement from the UUA website. The earth is our home. We are a part of this world, and its destiny is our own. Life on this planet will be gravely affected unless we embrace new practices, ethics, and values to guide our lives on a warming planet. Oh, serious stuff. We at UUCC have taken it seriously. We have been committed to doing just that, adopting and promoting practices that will sustain our planet. We were certified as a Green Sanctuary, a designation given to those congregations that engage in the environmentally sustainable practices that meet standards established by the UUA. Certification was the result of an intensive review of our practices, programs, and services to determine how well we honored our resources. Today, the Green Sanctuary certification requirements have an additional dimension. Today, a congregation must demonstrate a respect for and action toward environmental justice. Environmental justice has been described as an acknowledgement that marginalized communities are often hit first and hardest by environmental crises. And we must make a commitment to working to change that by partnering with those marginalized. That's what we're being called on to do today by the UUA. As I read the emphasis placed on this requirement of justice, I got to thinking about my drive to church, and it's so interesting that Bob spoke about his drive to church today. I don't pass substandard housing or unemployed young men on street corners or people sleeping in the streets. I don't need to shut my windows in order to keep the soot from coal-fired plants outside of my car or home. On the whole, I don't have concerns about the quality of the air I breathe nor the water I drink. I think probably that's true for most of us here today, and yet we know it's not the case for way too many in our country and in our world. After reading more about the addition of this concept to the Green Sanctuary certification process, I wanted to gain a better understanding of how the changing environment and justice are linked. What does that actually mean? How does one influence the other? I started with a review of the report, Not in My Backyard, a publication of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, that documented how environmental decisions had resulted in serious negative consequences for the poor and less influential. Perhaps some or many of you have read it. You may know about the many documented incidents of injustices influenced by business and government initiatives that had gravely negative effects on a segment of our population. I read about study after study confirming that race and ethnicity were the most significant factors in deciding where to place waste facilities, landfills, where to locate industries that pollute, and where to place other environmental hazards. I learned that increasingly throughout the nation, low-income residents and people of color were disproportionately exposed to a variety of environmental toxins in their respective neighborhoods, schools, homes, or workplaces. For example, a 1995 Washington State Health Survey indicated that in South Seattle, communities of color and those neighborhoods with a significant number of low-income residents house more industrial and waste facilities than any other part of the state. In South Park, one Seattle neighborhood, more than 40 industrial and waste facilities are situated within a 1 to 5 mile radius of residential homes. More than 40 industrial and waste facilities. Whether based solely on race or on market dynamics influenced by race, minority communities in Cuyahoga County, Ohio, Jefferson County, Texas, Chester, Pennsylvania, and Bibb County, Georgia, live in some of the most polluted communities in the United States. In Ohio, for example, the top 4 polluters in Cleveland are all located in or adjacent to minority communities. Cleveland Laminating Corporation is located in a predominantly minority community in Cuyahoga County. Within 1 mile of the plant, 90% of the population is minority. This plant is the 3rd worst air polluter in the county and is in the top 10% in the country for releasing carcinogens in the air. Jefferson County, Texas ranks in the top 10% for the worst air quality in the country. The 240,000 people in Jefferson County face a cancer risk more than 100 times the goal set by the Clean Air Act. In 2000, based on toxic chemical releases from manufacturing facilities, that county ranked among the dirtiest/worst 10% of all counties in the U.S. in terms of air releases of recognized reproductive toxicants. Potential sources of land contamination in the county include 3 Superfund sites, and in 2000, this county ranked among the dirtiest, worst 20% of all counties in the United States in underground injection, a method of land disposal in which liquid wastes are injected into known geological formations. The 2 major cities in Jefferson County, Beaumont and Port Arthur, are predominantly minority and suffer most from these hazardous exposures. In 2002, it was disclosed that for nearly 40 years in the rural, poor, and minority community of Anniston, Alabama, the Monsanto Corporation, while producing the now banned industrial coolants known as PCBs at a local factory, routinely discharged toxic waste into a West Anniston Creek and dumped millions of pounds of PCBs into open pit landfills. It was reported that thousands of pages of Monsanto documents, many emblazoned with warnings such as confidential, read and destroy, proved that the company intentionally concealed what it was doing and what it knew about the illegal dumping. Native American reservations as well have also been impacted. They've been consistently exposed to hazardous chemicals and have become prime locations for solid waste landfills, military weapons testing, and nuclear facilities. In fact, more than 35 Indian reservations were targeted for landfills, incinerators, and radioactive waste. A report by Rachel Massey of the Global and Environment Institute at Tufts University University titled Environmental Justice, Income, Race, and Health, exposes the fact that from Memphis, Tennessee to the Arctic Circle, deliberate decisions have been made that adversely affected the environment and health of those with the least power and influence. For instance, Memphis is home to a 642-acre defense depot that was operated by the U.S. Army and Department of Defense from 1942 to 1997. The depot is bordered on three sides by largely residential areas. 12 schools are within a mile of the depot's boundaries, and some homes are within 100 yards of those boundaries. The surrounding community is low income and predominantly black. Toxic chemicals from the depot, including lead, chromium, arsenic, mercury, and PCBs, have contaminated the soil, water, and air in surrounding communities. Toxic runoff drains into local streams, one of which flows next to the grounds of a local high school. Community members suffer severe health problems, including high rates of cancer and reproductive disorders. In the Arctic Circle, remember she said from Memphis to the Arctic Circle, Inuit communities lead a traditional lifestyle of hunting and fishing. The fish and seals that form the mainstays of the Inuit diet, however, are highly contaminated with industrial pollutants. The Inuit are not participants in the industrial economies that give rise to those pollutants, but they bear an enormous burden of pollution from those economies. Toxic chemicals produced throughout the world are found in extremely high levels in Inuit people's bodies and Inuit women's breast milk. Closer to home, in 1980, Families in Love Canal, a community near Niagara Falls, succeeded finally in pressuring the federal government to relocate them off the contaminated land where they had purchased their homes and were raising children. The Families in Love Canal had not been informed when they purchased homes that Hooker Chemical, a local company, had buried tons of hazardous waste in the neighborhood before the homes were built. Highly toxic wastes were seeping into these families' homes, the school playground, causing severe illnesses in local children. Love Canal families had, in many cases, put all their savings into purchasing homes in what they thought were safe, desirable, in a neighborhood for their children to grow up in. In 1978, when they discovered the truth about the toxic pollution in their backyards, basements, and schoolyard, they lacked the resources to simply abandon the homes they had purchased and relocate. After years of struggle, these families did win an agreement with the federal government in which they were given the resources to move to safer neighborhoods. Decades later, however, many other communities across the U.S. face similar situations today, and in many cases, the communities that are now fighting for relocation were there long before the industrial facilities that are driving them away. The water contamination issue in Flint, Michigan is a more recent example of how those perceived to be powerless are ignored when injustice occurs. Those affected by that water in Flint, Michigan were approximately 67% black, 33% white, all below the poverty level. Complaints were dismissed for many, many months. Eventually, testing was done and produced evidence of contaminated water. However, the report was buried, a decision made by an EPA official. Now, yes, heads did eventually roll, but only after legal intervention and many months of citizens drinking and bathing in contaminated water. Here at UUCC, we've acknowledged the seriousness of environmental issues, and we're committed to being good stewards of the earth. And we do so in many ways. And one issue that has been given great attention is that of climate change. With our Green Sanctuary Friday night films, now in its 5th year, we have created opportunities for greater understanding of the issues and for the discussion of the complexities involved with alternative forms of energy and other behavioral changes that influence the climate. The three purposes of the Green Sanctuary program: 1, to increase understanding of the issue; 2, to engage more people in the issue; 3, to influence change. You know, we've done really well with the first issue to increase understanding of the crisis. The films and presenters have expanded our knowledge of the complexities involved in preventing a catastrophic Earth event due to the effects of climate change. We've examined the use and misuse of water, the environmental impact of food choices, the abuse of animals raised for food, the impact of oil drilling and coal mining, the diminishing honeybees, the pros and cons of GMOs. With Marty Dodge, we traveled to Alaska and basked in the beauty of it. With Petra Page Mann, we learned about seed saving, and with Kathleen Draper, we learned about nutrient recycling. Carrie Graff sponsored a guest speaker and author who educated us on the environmental impact of food choices. We've done a lot to increase understanding of climate change, the potential impact on the Earth, and our responsibilities in reducing that impact. Our second purpose, to engage more people in the issue. Well, the film and speaker series has brought attendees to our church who are not members. They've engaged in the conversations, adding to the richness of the events. The numbers have been smaller than hoped for, but this coming year, Len Cronies and the Green Sanctuary team are going on the road. They'll be taking the series beyond these walls in order to create respectful conversations with those in surrounding communities. Our third purpose, to influence change, is a challenge. How do we influence others to consider the reality of it? Raising awareness among those not convinced yet, or those who fall into the deniers category with their seemingly rational arguments for the irrationality of the climate change projections and the accusations of self-serving motivations for the climate change movement. This effort to engage more people and increase awareness has been and will continue to be a challenge. We've been successful here, though, at UUCC in taking on challenges, big ones. The UUC No Fracking in New York State effort was intensive, consistent, and powerful. Letters and calls were continuous as the decisions were considered by the DEC. Many, many members of this congregation researched and responded to the DEC proposal. And I don't know if you remember this, but everything stated by the DEC, we had an opportunity to respond to. They were required to respond to every one of our responses. So the more responses sent in, the more time it took. It became a very time-consuming effort for the DEC, and as a result, the DEC chose not to move forward on it at that time. And then after a time, the governor banned fracking in New York State for now. That was the stipulation. You know, we can never prove prevention, but it's hard to believe that the overwhelming response did not have an effect. Bring Your Own Bag is another initiative taken by members of the Green Sanctuary and others, which has created an awareness of and engaged many in this effort to reduce the use of plastic bags. We Are Seneca Lake is an initiative undertaken to prevent the storage of propane in the salt caverns along Seneca Lake. Members of our congregation stood strong with others to prevent this, many going to jail. It's an ongoing effort. Crestwood Midstream, the organization that wants to store this material there, made some voluntary concessions just a couple of weeks ago. These concessions, which will never remove the resistance, they aren't going to remove the resistance. They are not acceptable by those who are resisting this. But they do show, the fact that those concessions were made shows the power of the people when the people are primarily white and middle class. In his recent book, What We Think About When We Try Not to Think About Global Warming, Per Espen-Stocknes states that for too long we've relied solely on the supposition that more facts will finally convince the wayward about climate change. Although facts are more solidly documented and disturbing year by year, we know that most people don't believe in climate change. As unlikely as it may seem, the level of concern among both lay people and politicians regarding climate change has actually been decreasing, especially in many wealthy countries, despite the objective data of thousands of studies. In the US, the concern about climate change has weakened overall since 1989, when the scientist James Hansen, then with NASA, testified before Congress that climate change had indeed begun, prompting headline news. The same is true for other rich countries. Norway, a rich oil country, shows an even stronger decline in concern. Some psychological studies even point to a strange relationship between global warming denial and speaking English, since the US, UK, and Australia are countries with waning levels of average public concern. He suggests that faced with the psychological burden of climate information, they decide the science may be false. Others prefer to see it as natural. Climate change, the climate's always changing. He suggests using the term climate disruption. Others contend that it's an exaggerated media story. Some say it's a hoax or a conspiracy or a trick to get more research money. If they can convince themselves that it's not important, it can be dismissed. James Hoban, author of I'm Right and You're the Idiot, yes, that's the title of the book, I'm Right and You're the Idiot, in an interview with greenamerica.org, excuse me, describes an interview with Thich Nhat Hanh, who said, "We don't need to keep telling people they're destroying the planet. We need to deal with the despair, speak truth, but not to punish." The author's interpretation, we should never be afraid to speak up against injustice, but it's how we do it, accusing people of bad intentions and offending their sense of sacredness creates resistance. When I read that and thought about recent comments at a family reunion a few Sundays ago that stirred a deeply negative response within me, one that I did not deliver, I'm happy to say. It was tough not to counter what in my mind at that time, which was, this is ignorance. And I think of how difficult it is not to polarize others when something touches our deepest values. Hoban cites the recent election rhetoric and the dangerous phenomenon called groupish righteousness. Groupish righteousness. He states that one of the current presidential candidates feeds off of that and connects it to one of the most common emotions, fear. In that state, messages such as "don't worry about climate change, it's a hoax," play well, and the demagogue gets away with it unless we speak out. Speak the truth, but not punish. Stokes says that what makes the climate crisis ghostly is that it seems to press nearly all the wrong buttons. It's about abstract, imperceptible, and gradual changes in weather trends from decade to decade. It's beyond anyone's control and reach. He points out the serious risks that climate disruption poses to us all, and particularly to the poor and those human beings that don't even participate in the climate debate. They have no power, no voice in opposing rich countries' climate emissions that slowly destroy their home, their ecology. Those are the challenges. In spite of those challenges, there is a preponderance of evidence that this congregation makes a difference. In addition to green sanctuary activities mentioned previously, there have been and are the following initiatives: literacy training and support services of migrant workers, care packages for refugees, supplies for the local food kitchen, dietary changes that favor the environment, Second Sunday collection donations to special causes, maintenance of sustainable practices within our building. These are just a few of the ways we respond as a congregation. I know there are many more. And then, of course, there are all of the ways members work individually to care for the earth and those in need, such as the prison ministry undertaken by Mary Beth and Peter Gamba. It seems to me that the seventh principle is not only in our hearts, it's in our DNA. And we have more work to do. Years ago, in a training seminar that I can no longer even remember the purpose of, the presenter was stressing the need to be aware of what is happening in the moment. And he told about a teacher who was teaching young children in her classroom, and she was engrossed in the material and her learning objectives. And there was a child in the room waving his hand frantically. She finally called upon the student whose hand had been waving feverishly in the air for several minutes. The child said, "Teacher, the geranium on the windowsill just died," and you went right on. Over the years, for some reason, those words continue to be a reminder to me that I need to pay attention, that the interdependent web is extensive and extends far beyond the beauty that surrounds me here, beyond my town, my county, region, state, or country, and that I must be aware of and pay attention to those who cannot speak for themselves. Justice is not going to happen for those who have no influence, unless those of us who can be heard work with them on their behalf. With a deep commitment to justice, the Social Justice Committee has merged with the Green Sanctuary Committee and assumed the title of the Social and Environmental Justice Committee. We are making a commitment. We will use what power we have on behalf of those who have none. We will not let the geranium on the windowsill die if it is at all within our power to prevent it. And we will raise our hands in the air, as the child did, to bring the attention to the needs of those far outside these lovely Finger Lakes. We will build a large web of inclusion, a large interdependent web. It is the hope of the Social and Environmental Justice Committee that this congregation will support efforts to influence the powerful on behalf of the powerless. Let us join with others who share our values, making a commitment to work for the empowerment of all. In doing so, we'll not only be honoring the seventh principle, but each and every one of them. May it be so.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Go in peace.
Rita. Was it? Well, coming from you, I appreciate that, Kathy.
Structure was so apparent.
You like it?
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.